Hola? What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
The rain pounded down on the black umbrellas clustered around my father's grave in that dreary Cleveland cemetery, turning the earth into a muddy slurry that clung to everyone's shoes while I stood there feeling the weight of unspoken resentments pressing harder than the damp chill seeping through my coat. Wondering how a man who spent his life building a stable world for us could leave behind such a fractured legacy that exposed every crack in our family bonds right at the moment we needed unity the most. My brothers, Mark and David, positioned themselves protectively near Mom, their broad shoulders hunched against the weather as if shielding her from more than just the storm, while my sister Lisa lingered at the edge of the group, her designer rain boots sinking slightly into the grass, her expression a calculated blend of sorrow and poise that always made me feel like the awkward outsider in my own bloodline, the divorced graphic designer scraping by on freelance gigs from a one-bedroom apartment that echoed with the absence of the family life I'd once imagined. As the casket descended with a mechanical whine that cut through the minister's final words, I caught Mom's glance sliding my way, laced with that familiar mix of pity and disapproval. The kind that reminded me how I'd always been the one least likely to follow the script Dad wrote for success, the practical paths he paved for the boys, and the polished femininity he encouraged in Lisa, leaving me to navigate the messier routes of creativity and independence that he dismissed as flights of fancy. 2 days later, we gathered in the dimly lit office of Dad's longtime lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, a man whose wire-rimmed glasses and rumpled suits evoked images of forgotten ledgers gathering dust in attics. The air thick with the scent of stale coffee and anticipation as we settled into mismatched chairs that creaked under our collective tension, each of us harboring private hopes about what portion of Dad's modest empire might finally affirm our worth in his eyes after years of subtle competitions. Masked as sibling support, Hargrove adjusted his notes with deliberate slowness, his voice steady and bureaucratic as he outlined the distribution of assets accumulated from Dad's hardware supply business, a venture that had started in a garage and grown into something solid enough to weather recessions, but not flashy enough to erase the everyday struggles we all knew too well. Mark, the eldest at 42 with his receding hairline and perpetual worry lines from managing sales teams, received a substantial block of company shares that promised to bolster his faltering attempts at upward mobility, the kind of inheritance that whispered security and validated his long hours away from a wife who complained about his absences more than she appreciated the paycheck. David, 35, and the engineer who'd always been Dad's favorite for his analytical mind, inherited the family cabin nestled in the Michigan woods, a rustic retreat complete with lake access that evoked weekends of fishing and fireside talks. The property's value not just in dollars, but in the nostalgia it carried for holidays that had once knit us closer before life pulled us apart. When Lisa's turn came, the room seemed to soften under the glow of Hargrove's description, her allocation including Mom's cherished jewelry collection passed down through generations of women who navigated high society with grace and grit. Pieces like the pearl necklace that had adorned great-grandma at wartime galas and the diamond earrings that sparkled with stories of resilience amid economic hardships, items that Lisa accepted with a demure nod, her fingers already twitching as if envisioning how they might elevate her status in the social circles she chased with relentless energy. I watched her closely, feeling that familiar twinge of exclusion, the way these tangible symbols of heritage always seemed to bypass me. The middle child at 38 who had traded corporate stability for the unpredictable rhythm of designing logos and websites from home. My divorce 2 years prior leaving me with shared custody of my daughter Emma and a bank account that rarely saw surpluses yet. Somehow I still showed up for these family rituals, clinging to the hope that Dad saw value in the quiet persistence I'd inherited from him despite his gruff dismissals. Then Hargrove turned to me, his expression neutral as he extracted a simple envelope from the stack, sealed with the embossed initial R for Robert that Dad used on official papers, and slid it across the polished oak table where it landed with a soft thud that amplified in the sudden hush, everyone's eyes converging on me with a cocktail of curiosity, sympathy, and barely concealed amusement that made my pulse quicken in anticipation of whatever underwhelming token awaited the family black sheep. I tore it open carefully, my fingers brushing against crisp paper that unfolded to reveal a single plane ticket, first class and one way, destined for Monaco with a departure date just 3 days away. Accompanied by no explanatory note or financial backing, only the stark itinerary printed in elegant font that mocked the practicality of everything else distributed that afternoon. Mom's laughter erupted first, sharp and involuntary, echoing off the paneled walls as she clutched her chest in exaggerated mirth, her words tumbling out between gasps about how on earth I was supposed to make a living there, perhaps scrubbing decks on billionaire yachts or serving canapés at casino soirees. The implication clear that Dad's final gesture was nothing more than a cruel jest aimed at my perceived impracticality, the punchline to years of her warnings that my artistic pursuits would leave me adrift without a safety net. The brothers joined in with chuckles that started hesitant but gained momentum, Mark muttering something about it being Dad's way of pushing me toward adventure since I never stuck to a real job, while David shook his head with that condescending smirk, suggesting I could always come crawling back if the glamour wore off, and Lisa's titter added a layer of feminine solidarity turned sour, her eyes gleaming with the relief that her own windfall remained unchallenged. Heat flooded my face, a burning mix of humiliation and rage that transported me back to childhood dinners where Dad praised the boys' report cards and Lisa's piano recitals, glossing over my sketches with a pat on the head and a suggestion to focus on something useful, yet beneath the sting lay a defiant spark ignited by the ticket's audacity, a challenge from beyond the grave that dared me to step outside the box he'd built around me, to prove that the overlooked path might lead somewhere unforeseen rather than the dead ends everyone assumed. I pocketed the ticket without a word, excusing myself from the office amid their fading laughter, my mind already racing through logistics, calling my client for emergency leave, packing essentials that might pass for international chic, and silencing Mom's incoming call with a swipe that felt like the first small victory in reclaiming agency from their judgments. The ensuing days blurred into a frenzy of preparations, my apartment transforming into a whirlwind of half-folded clothes and unchecked emails, Emma's excited questions about my sudden trip fueling a resolve I hadn't felt since before the divorce. While doubts nagged at the edges about Dad's secretive past, those vague tales of his early career in European diplomacy before he returned to Ohio roots, stories he'd shared in fragments over backyard barbecues that now seemed laced with omissions, hinting at connections far grander than hardware deals. Boarding the flight felt like crossing an invisible threshold, the cabin's plush seats and complimentary champagne a stark contrast to my usual economy squeezes, allowing my thoughts to wander through what-ifs about Monaco's sun-drenched harbors and hidden worlds. The ticket no longer a joke, but a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. As the plane descended over the glittering principality, yachts dotting the azure sea like jewels against velvet, a sleek limousine awaited at the curb, its driver emerging with polished efficiency to claim my luggage, his posture straightening into a formal bow that caught me off guard amid the airport's bustle. With a voice smooth as aged whiskey, he addressed me as ma'am and conveyed that the prince desired my immediate presence, the words landing like a thunderclap that shattered any lingering illusions of this being a mere vacation, propelling me into a reality where family betrayals paled against the enigma unfolding before me. The driver's formal bow and those unexpected words about the prince hung in the balmy Monaco air like an invitation to a game I hadn't agreed to play, pulling me into the limousine's shadowed interior where the scent of leather and faint cologne mingled with the salty breeze wafting through cracked windows, my heart pounding as we glided away from the airport toward a horizon dotted with super-yachts that seemed to mock my ordinary life back in Ohio with their effortless displays of wealth and privilege. I gripped the ticket stub in my pocket like a talisman against the surreal turn this trip had taken, my mind replaying Mom's mocking laughter from the will reading and the brothers' smug assurances that I'd soon regret chasing Dad's bizarre final whim. Yet beneath the anxiety stirred a flicker of exhilaration at the possibility that this summons held answers to the fragments of his past he'd always kept locked away, those late-night mutterings about European postings that hinted at adventures far removed from the hardware stores and suburban routines he later embraced with such fervor. As the car ascended winding coastal roads lined with pastel villas clinging to cliffs like secrets too heavy to let go, the driver offered sparse details in his clipped accent, mentioning only that Prince Alexander had anticipated my arrival based on an old correspondence from my father, a revelation that twisted my thoughts into knots about what diplomatic shadows Dad might have cast during his brief stint abroad in the 70s, connections that could explain why a one-way ticket to this tiny principality felt less like a joke and more like a deliberate thread in a larger tapestry I was only beginning to unravel. We arrived at the palace gates under a canopy of ancient olive trees, security personnel waving us through with nods that spoke of routine protocol rather than alarm. And soon I found myself ushered into a sunlit anteroom adorned with tapestries depicting maritime triumphs, the kind of opulent space that made my sensible flats feel like interlopers on the polished terrazzo floors, a royal aide appearing almost immediately to appraise me with a raised eyebrow and a murmur about freshening up before the audience. She led me to a powder room stocked with amenities that rivaled a high-end spa, where I splashed water on my face and attempted to tame my travel-tousled hair, catching my reflection in a gilded mirror that amplified every line of doubt etched from years of family dismissals and professional uncertainties, wondering if this prince saw in me the same overlooked potential Dad had ignored or if I was about to become the punchline to an international misunderstanding. Emerging composed as possible in my wrinkled blouse and jeans, I was escorted to a private salon overlooking the Mediterranean, where Prince Alexander waited with the poised elegance of someone born to such surroundings. His mid-40s frame lean and assured in a linen shirt that blended casual sophistication with underlying authority, extending a hand whose firm grip conveyed both welcome and scrutiny as he gestured to a settee piled with cushions in soft sea tones. He dove straight into the purpose of my visit without the preamble of pleasantries that might have eased a more prepared guest, explaining over a tray of delicate pastries and herbal tea that my father, Robert Jenkins, had forged an unlikely bond with Monaco during a sensitive trade negotiation 3 decades prior, serving as a discreet American liaison who navigated bureaucratic minefields to shield the principality's financial interests from prying U.S. regulators, a role that earned him not just professional respect, but a personal vow of reciprocity from the royal family that now manifested in this urgent summons. Alexander's eyes, a piercing blue that echoed the waters below, held mine steadily as he described how Dad's intervention had averted a scandal involving offshore accounts tied to charitable foundations. Details that painted my unassuming father as a behind-the-scenes operator whose quiet heroism contrasted sharply with the mundane life he returned to, leaving me grappling with the dissonance between the man who taught me to fix leaky faucets and this shadowy figure who hobnobbed with nobility. Skepticism flickered from the aides lingering in the doorway, their whispers about an American commoner's sudden relevance grating against the room's refined air, one of them interjecting with veiled questions about my credentials that made me bristle inwardly at the implication I was some opportunistic drifter crashing their elite circle, prompting a dry quip from me about how cleaning yachts was off the table since Mom had already claimed that career path for me back home, a humorous deflection that drew a brief smile from the prince, but only tightened the aide's lips further. To illustrate his point, Alexander retrieved a leather-bound album from a nearby shelf, its pages yellowed with age, and opened to a photograph capturing Dad in a sharp suit amid a group of dignitaries at what looked like a harbor gala, his arm casually around a woman whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to younger versions of Monaco socialites I'd glimpsed in magazines, with a young girl, possibly me. Though the timeline blurred, standing nearby clutching a stuffed toy, the image laced with subtle clues like an inscribed bracelet that matched one Mom wore but never explained, stirring a whirlwind of questions about hidden lineages and why Dad chose silence over sharing such a pivotal chapter. As our conversation deepened, my phone vibrated insistently in my bag, pulling me from the revelations with a voicemail from Mark that I played on low volume. His voice slurring slightly from what sounded like celebratory drinks as he boasted about undervaluing the Monaco ticket in the will discussions to snag extra shares for himself and David. Admitting with a chuckle that they'd convinced the lawyer it was worthless bait to keep me from contesting anything substantial, the casual greed in his tone fueling a cold resolve that had me excusing myself briefly to the terrace. There, with the sea crashing below like applause for my mounting indignation, I forwarded the recording to an old college friend who moonlighted as a tipster for local business watchdogs, framing it anonymously as a lead on ethical lapses in family estates. A clever maneuver that promised to stir just enough scrutiny to humble my brothers without dragging my name into the fray, the petty thrill of it cutting through the palace's grandeur like a breath of Midwestern revenge. Rejoining Alexander, I masked my satisfaction behind polite inquiries about next steps, his offer of a guided tour through the estate's private gardens providing a momentary respite as we strolled paths lined with blooming jasmine that perfumed the air with deceptive serenity, discussing how Dad's favor might extend to safeguarding me from unspecified threats tied to those old dealings. Yet as we paused at a vantage point offering panoramic views of the coastline, a sleek black sedan crept along the distant road paralleling the palace walls, its tinted windows fixed unwaveringly on our position before it accelerated away. The ominous linger of its presence sending a chill down my spine that hinted this royal welcome came wrapped in shadows far darker than the family betrayals I'd left behind. That black sedan's deliberate creep along the palace perimeter lingered in my thoughts long after it vanished around a bend in the coastal road, transforming the prince's guided stroll through those jasmine-scented gardens into a tense negotiation between budding trust and the instinctive wariness I'd honed from years of navigating family politics back in Ohio, where every favor came with strings attached, making me wonder if Dad's old favor to the royals had inadvertently painted a target on my back for lingering grudges from deals gone sour in the shadowy world of international finance. Alexander noticed my distraction immediately, his hand lightly touching my elbow to steer me toward a secluded bench overlooking the crashing waves, where he shared more about the vulnerabilities tied to his family's legacy, explaining how Monaco's facade of glamour masked undercurrents of corporate espionage and rival claimants who viewed any resurfacing of past scandals as a threat to their own entrenched positions, his voice dropping to a confidential timbre that hinted at personal stakes beyond mere obligation to Dad's memory. By the time we returned indoors, the afternoon sun casting elongated shadows across the marble halls that seemed to whisper warnings of unseen watchers, Elena appeared at my side like a timely ally, the prince's cousin by marriage and a woman whose no-frills demeanor cut through the palace's artifice with the practicality of someone who'd seen too many outsiders burn out in this high-stakes playground, offering to show me the principality's less polished side away from the tourist gloss that often hid the real intrigues bubbling beneath. We slipped out through a side entrance in her unassuming coupe, the engine purring softly as we descended into Monaco's labyrinthine lower streets, where laundry lines crisscrossed between weathered buildings and locals bartered fresh seafood at markets that evoked the gritty neighborhoods I'd known in Cleveland, a comforting reminder of authenticity amid the opulence that threatened to swallow my sense of self whole. Elena proved an invaluable guide through this underbelly, her knowledge of back channels stemming from years assisting with discreet royal errands, as she pointed out nondescript cafes where expats swapped tales of fortunes made and lost in the casinos, steering me toward a harborside bistro where the air smelled of garlic and grilled fish, introducing me to Victor, a retired diplomat whose salt and pepper beard and rumpled linen jacket belied his sharp recall of Dad's era in European postings. Over plates of bouillabaisse that warmed against the encroaching evening chill, Victor delved into specifics of the negotiation Dad had masterminded, detailing how it involved rerouting funds through Monaco's banks to evade a U.S. probe into arms trade loopholes during the Cold War aftermath, a maneuver that not only preserved the Grimaldi's neutrality but also earned Dad a coded promise of asylum for his descendants should political winds shift unfavorably back home, his anecdotes laced with Subtle clues like mentions of a forgotten liaison that made me ponder if Mom's occasional silences about Dad's travels hid more than just professional pride. As we navigated the winding alleys post-meal, Elena's eyes constantly flicking to rearview mirrors for any sign of tails, the conversation turned to immediate risks, with Victor warning that my arrival had likely alerted opportunists who profited from burying those old files, suggesting I consider adopting a low-profile alias for outings to blend into the expat crowd rather than parading as the American tide to royal summons, a dilemma that gnawed at me fiercely since faking an identity felt like a betrayal of the honesty I'd clung to through my divorce and freelance struggles. Yet the logic of survival in this glittering viper's nest appealed to the pragmatic side Dad had instilled despite his dismissals of my dreams. We dodged what seemed like a suspicious loiterer near a pharmacy by ducking into a gelato shop, the cold treat a momentary levity as Elena quipped about how even royals hid behind pseudonyms for spa days, her humor lightening the tension while I weighed the cost of erasure against the freedom it might buy, ultimately pocketing a forged ID card Victor pressed into my hand with a wink that promised deniability. The day's revelations deepened my uneasy bond with Alexander when we reconvened at the palace for a casual dinner on the terrace, the candlelight flickering across his features as he probed gently about my hesitations. Sharing a vulnerable story of his own identity crises after losing a sibling to illness years ago, a parallel to Dad's hidden burdens that drew me closer despite the red flags of his world's isolation, making me question if this connection offered genuine partnership or just another layer of dependency I couldn't afford at 38 with a life waiting stateside. Midway through the meal, my phone lit up with a forwarded article from a contact back home, detailing an anonymous tip about irregularities in Mark and David's handling of Dad's shares, including whispers of insider trades that skirted ethical lines to maximize their gains at the expense of the company's long-term health, the exposure cleverly timed to coincide with a local business expo they were attending, ensuring the story spread like wildfire through Ohio networks without my fingerprints anywhere near it, a satisfying payback that had me suppressing a grin over my wineglass as Alexander raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Yet the evening's peace shattered upon returning to my guest suite, the door ajar in a way I didn't recall leaving it, prompting a cautious entry where the opulent furnishings now loomed with menace under the dim lamplight, my search revealing no overt disturbance until I spotted the folded paper slipped beneath the pillow on the canopied bed, its message in block letters declaring that meddlers in forgotten debts would join the ghosts of indiscretions past if they didn't depart by dawn, the threat's icy precision sending my pulse racing as I clutched the note, realizing the shadows in the sun had followed me right into the heart of this unexpected sanctuary. The note's stark warning clutched in my fist transformed the opulent guest suite into a claustrophobic cage where every rustle of silk curtains against the night breeze mimicked footsteps of intruders circling just beyond sight, forcing me to barricade the door with a heavy armchair before collapsing onto the bed in a tangle of sheets that offered no real comfort against the paranoia creeping through my veins like the chill from the open balcony doors overlooking Monaco's twinkling lights. Sleep evaded me entirely, my mind replaying Victor's cautions about old rivals who thrived on silencing echoes of past indiscretions, blending them with the prince's guarded revelations to paint a picture of Dad's diplomatic favor as less a heroic footnote and more a Pandora's box he'd cracked open with that one-way ticket, leaving me to contend with the fallout in a world where family ties felt as fragile as the spun-glass figurines adorning the room's shelves. Dawn filtered through the gauzy drapes like a reluctant ally, prompting me to seek out Alexander in the palace's sun-drenched library where bookshelves towered like silent sentinels guarding secrets of nobility and intrigue. His presence at a mahogany desk surrounded by scattered documents suggesting he'd spent the night in similar vigil, his eyes shadowed, but alert as he rose to meet me with a concern that bordered on paternal protectiveness. I thrust the note toward him without preamble, watching his expression harden into calculated resolve as he scanned the words, then explained that such threats often came from peripheral players in the financial web Dad had untangled, individuals whose fortunes depended on the perpetual burial of those 80s-era fund diversions. but he assured me the palace security would tighten like a noose around potential infiltrators while Elena coordinated a discreet investigation through Victor's network. Desperate for grounding amid the escalating uncertainties, I borrowed a secure tablet from the aides and initiated a video call to Mom back in Ohio, the connection crackling slightly as her face materialized on the screen from the cluttered den where Dad's old desk still loomed like a ghost. Her hair disheveled in a way that betrayed the strain of sorting through his effects alone now that the siblings had scattered with their prizes. She brightened at first, mistaking the call for a homesick check-in, but my direct questions about the will's peculiarities and Dad's unspoken European connections drew a veil of evasion over her features, her fingers twisting a dishcloth as she deflected with platitudes about his practical mindset until I mentioned the royal summons, at which point her composure fractured, admitting in a rush that Dad had confided months before his passing about rewriting the inheritance to jolt me from complacency. Yet the brothers and Lisa had leaned on Hargrove to marginalize my portion, even sequestering a shared family locket engraved with our initials that symbolized the unity Dad always preached but rarely fostered. That confession ignited a firestorm of resentment tempered by the wry realization that my so-called joke inheritance had unearthed truths the others buried under greed, prompting me to enlist Victor's savvy in tracing the locket's recent listing at a discreet Ohio estate auction, where Lisa aimed to flip it for quick cash toward her vanity projects, his team outmaneuvering her bid through an anonymous proxy account that funneled the piece back to me via courier without a trace, the delivery arriving that afternoon wrapped in plain paper that belied its sentimental weight, a clever reclamation that left Lisa's furious voicemail ranting about phantom competitors and lost windfalls, her frustration a petty symphony playing in my earbuds as I clasped the locket around my neck, feeling its cool metal affirm a heritage the family had tried to parcel out unevenly. The day's tensions culminated in an invitation to a high-society gala at the Monte Carlo casino, where Alexander insisted on my attendance as a subtle show of alliance against the lurking threats, dressing me in a borrowed gown of midnight silk that hugged curves I'd long ignored in favor of yoga pants and client deadlines, the fabric whispering against my skin as we entered the grand salon amid chandeliers dripping light like molten gold over tuxedoed guests whose conversations hummed with veiled power plays. Navigating the crowd felt like threading a needle in a hurricane, with Alexander's arm linked through mine providing an anchor of sorts, yet his proximity stirred unwelcome complications. The brush of his fingers during introductions sending sparks that clashed with my hard-won independence, making me inwardly scoff at the irony of trading one form of family obligation for another wrapped in royal allure, especially as a silver-haired investor sidled up mid-evening with a knowing smile, casually referencing details of my flight itinerary that only palace insiders should know, his probing questions about Dad's other commitments, hinting at leaks within the very walls meant to protect me. As the orchestra swelled with waltzes that evoked faded romances from old Hollywood films, Alexander drew me aside to a quieter alcove framed by velvet drapes, his expression grave as he produced a slim envelope sealed with wax that matched the palace crest, revealing inside the results of a preliminary DNA analysis he'd commissioned upon my arrival, the documents confirming an unexpected biological tie that blurred the lines between favor and fate, but he held back the full implications with a measured pause, his gaze searching mine for readiness as champagne flutes clinked nearby, leaving the revelation suspended like a sword over the fragile piece I'd carved from this whirlwind of legacies and lies. The envelope's sealed contents burned in my palm like a live wire during that alcove interlude at the casino gala, the wax crest cracking under my thumb as Alexander's expectant silence stretched taut between us amid the swirl of gowns and murmured deals that filled the grand hall, his revelation unfolding in hushed tones that confirmed the DNA match pointed not to a distant favor, but to a profound entanglement from Dad's diplomatic days, naming me the daughter of a brief, passionate liaison with a Monaco noblewoman who had perished tragically young in a yachting accident. positioning me as Alexander's half-sister through that hidden lineage and explaining the prince's personal urgency in summoning me while unraveling the fabric of the life Dad had constructed back in Ohio with such deliberate anonymity. This bombshell cascaded through my thoughts like a riptide, blending shock with a wry amusement at the cosmic joke of inheriting royal blood after years of being the family footnote. Yet it also unearthed a storm of betrayal toward Dad for concealing such a seismic truth, raising questions about whether his return to Mom and the structured chaos of our upbringing stemmed from duty or denial, leaving me to navigate the emotional wreckage in a principality that suddenly felt less like an escape and more like the epicenter of suppressed histories I'd unwittingly inherited. As the gala's toasts rang out in celebration of diplomatic ties that masked deeper intrigues, the weight of this heritage propelled me toward a confrontation that had simmered since my arrival. Alexander arranging a secure video link from a private lounge where the siblings and Mom appeared on split screens from the Ohio home, their faces a mosaic of surprise and defensiveness under the harsh kitchen lighting that exposed the disarray of unpacked boxes and lingering resentment from the Wills' fallout. I laid out the DNA results with clinical detachment, watching Mark's jaw slacken and David's eyes narrow in disbelief, while Lisa gasped theatrically and Mom clutched the locket I'd reclaimed, their denials fracturing into admissions of complicity in downplaying Dad's intentions, revealing how they'd colluded with Hargrove to frame the Monaco ticket as a frivolous aside, thereby inflating their shares and trinkets at my expense in a bid to preserve the family's traditional hierarchy that always marginalized my unconventional path. The exchange devolved into accusations flying like barbs across the Atlantic, my brothers defending their greed as pragmatic choices in a tough economy and Lisa whining about the jewelry's sentimental lock on her future. But Mom's tearful confession about Dad's whispered regrets over his divided loyalties cut deepest, humanizing the manipulations while fueling my resolve to dismantle the inequities they'd woven so tightly. With Elena and Victor's covert assistance from the palace shadows, I orchestrated the ultimate reckoning through a meticulously prepared legal filing dispatched to a trusted U.S. estate attorney specializing in contested wills. The document compiling irrefutable evidence from the anonymous voicemails, audit triggers I'd set in motion, and now the international correspondences unearthed in Dad's hidden files, challenging the inheritance distribution on grounds of fraud and undue influence that would compel a court-ordered redistribution or public exposure in Ohio's tabloids, a bloodless yet devastating strike that promised to strip the siblings of their ill-gotten edges without requiring my physical return or direct testimony. The witty precision of it leaving me chuckling inwardly at how Dad's joke had armed me with the leverage to rewrite the narrative they thought sealed. Confirmations pinged my secure phone as the filing cleared submission, the satisfaction blooming like a long overdue dawn against the Monaco night, yet it intertwined with the prince's offer of a shadowed role in the Grimaldi legacy, complete with a trust fund and protective enclave that tempted my weary independence with visions of stability far beyond freelance uncertainties. His hand lingering near mine in a gesture fraught with fraternal warmth laced with the complications of our shared blood, making me inwardly balk at the notion of trading one family's dysfunction for another's gilded version. As I prepared to depart the principality on a chartered flight that blurred the lines between retreat and reinvention, the airport's hum of departures echoing my internal turmoil, Alexander slipped a final envelope into my carry-on, its contents outlining the noblewoman's untold story and a codicil to Dad's while hinting at additional assets tied to Monaco that only a return could unlock, his parting words a gentle prod about embracing the heritage that had called me across oceans while respecting the autonomy I'd fought to claim. Gazing out the window as the coastline receded into a shimmering ribbon against the sea, I pondered the ticket's dual nature. Whether it represented Dad's liberating gambit to propel me beyond the resentments that bound us or a burdensome curse that entangled me in secrets too vast for one woman's reckoning. The ambiguities lingering like unanswered echoes in the cabin's quiet, inviting reflections on legacies that defy simple inheritance and the choices that define us long after the graves are filled.